Hi guys, it's your host Eliana and welcome back to another episode of Your Vibe Tribe podcast. Today's episode is a solo sesh, so just you and me. But before we get into today's episode, I did just want to take a moment to thank you guys for listening. It really does mean the world to me. Thank you to every person that tunes in week after week and supports this podcast. Again, your support is what will help this platform and this podcast grow. And I am so grateful for each of you and your support. If you haven't already, I'd love for you to take a moment and rate the show wherever you listen. Also, if you're not following the show, make sure to follow and subscribe. That way you never miss another episode. All right, let's get into this week's episode. I wanted to talk today about how we create our own stress. As women who have full-time careers, who are chasing our dreams, who are handling relationships, friendship dynamics, a lot of times we can get overwhelmed, we can get stressed out. But what I want to talk about today is how to separate the stress that we are creating ourselves. I have been a victim of this many of times, and I want to give you guys actual tips and I want to bring some awareness around this topic because I think a lot of times, especially as women, we can create a lot of our own stress. But if we can bring more awareness onto how we handle stress, how we cope with it, how we manage it, and how we can actually handle it better, this will be a game changer for you because it has helped me so much. Being more self-aware and changing my perspective and my mindset around my stress has completely changed how I handle stress, and it's made my life just overall so much easier, so much lighter, and I have more space and energy to focus on the things that fill up my cup and ignite happiness in my soul, like this podcast. First, I want to talk about how much of the stress that we bring into our lives we're actually creating on our own. And I want to use the prime example of work, right? Most of us listening to this podcast have a 9-to-5 job or some way of making income, whether that's your own business or maybe you're still working in a corporate job like me, 9-to-5. I am a very type A person. And I think if you're listening to a mindset podcast and a mindset show like Your Vibe Tribe, you're probably also a type A person, or you're someone that's trying to improve and trying to be the best version of themselves. So people like us are typically really hard on ourselves, right? We're always wanting to achieve more. We're always wanting to do better. We're always wanting to be the best at what we do. With that being said, it can get very toxic very quick. I want to give an example of how I realized finally that a lot of the stress that I was creating on myself came from me. I had a job. This is like my second job after graduating college, and it was a sales job. I had to do door-to-door sales, which is really hard. I am not really someone that is passionate about sales. I'm very just like real and honest. If I don't really believe in what I'm selling, it's going to be so hard. I'm just very like realistic. I don't really embellish things. I'm a very like realistic person. So that's kind of a hard personality for someone to get into sales because salespeople, you do kind of have to like embellish a little bit and make things more like awesome than they really are to get that person to buy into what you're offering, right? So this job, I had to do door-to-door sales. I was selling office supplies. It was, tough as a woman going into each of these businesses and trying to get their business. It's so uncomfortable. We had metrics that they would give us that we'd have to open up. I think it was like 10 accounts a week, something like that. So that's like 2 accounts a day. And obviously if you're going into like 15, 20 businesses, the chances that you're going to get 2 accounts is a good percentage, right? Like that's not super difficult to do. Sometimes you have bad days, but if you're very consistent with it and you're really putting in the effort, like you can do that. But I remember I just hated the job so much. It was so hard for me to do that. I didn't like it. It was so uncomfortable for me. And I also was like putting it in my mind that I'm like, I have to be the number one. 2 accounts is just like not good enough. I need to do more. And I was like putting more pressure on myself to do to be the best at something that I didn't even really care about. And listen, if this is like your only source of income and, your main job, of course, you should be putting that kind of pressure to like be good at what you do and put in the effort. But at some point, it stops being productive to what you're doing. Because if you're putting so much pressure and stress on yourself that it ends up inhibiting your mindset, your state of mind, and how much effort you can actually put into something, it's counterproductive. Problem with the job wasn't the job. The problem was me. I had a really hard time coping with the stress of production, right? It's a production job, it's a sales job. You have to meet weekly metrics, you have to meet weekly targets. And even when I was hitting those metrics, I didn't ever feel like it was good enough. And so what would end up happening is that I would do really, really well. And even though I was performing, I would create this anxiety and this stress around not performing maybe the next month as well as I was doing this month. And so I would go through these periods where I had put so much pressure on myself that I would almost like just have a complete lack of want or desire to do the job. And it really affected my outlook on the conversations I was having. It just really created this like negative attitude that I had going into this job every day. And it really affected the type of employee that I was. It started to affect how I treated my coworkers. But a lot of it was stress that I was creating myself. I realized that in any job, there's going to be metrics, there's going to be expectations. But I think for people like us who are type A and who want to do more and who want to go above and beyond, a lot of that going above and beyond and that extra stress we are putting on ourselves. Like, I remember I would stay working until like 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, just to try and get better metrics. Or like, okay, yes, I am performing better, but also it's like, you can't just overwork yourself to the point that then the next month you end up not wanting to do anything. And it starts to affect how you look at the job, how you start performing, because you've created so much stress in yourself that you just like can't summon the energy to do anything else. Because there's a difference between holding yourself accountable and also putting these toxic metrics and expectations on yourself to hold to that aren't really, that no one's putting on us. We're putting it on ourselves. Once I realized like, okay, all of the stress I'm literally putting on myself. No one is putting the stress on me. I'm creating my own stress because I'm perceiving these things to be urgent and to be dire when they're not. They're not urgent or dire. The world's not going to end if I don't work till 8 o'clock this Friday. I can log off at 5 o'clock and I can come back on Monday and start to work on this calmly and mindfully without it being or needing to be stressful or urgent or dire. And I think being able to pick and choose what things are urgent can be helpful, because if you are in a constant state of stress, it's because you're making everything out to be dire and urgent when it's not. So another way that I was able to minimize stress in my life is by also changing my mindset in how I viewed the things that I did. I would always do more and strive to do more and push myself and break my back to do more things and pile on tasks for myself, because I just always felt like what I was doing wasn't enough. And I think as women in working in corporate America, we always feel like we need to overcompensate in our intelligence and in what we do to be treated the same as our counterparts. And so I think that that's something that we can change our mindset and realize that like what I'm doing is good enough. And I don't need to overcompensate to show my intelligence or my skill level. The things I'm doing are great, they're valuable, and I am not replaceable. I bring a unique value to this company. I bring a unique value to this relationship, whatever it is. And I think once you switch that mindset that I am good enough and you know what I'm doing is worth a lot and I am valuable, once you change that mindset, I'm telling you, that stress will just dissipate. Another great way that I've been able to cope with my stress is not setting these unrealistic expectations for myself. And this is just what has worked for me. You know, there's people that could have crazy goals, and I think it is great to shoot for the stars. I'm not by any means saying don't shoot for the stars, right? You should have these crazy goals. You shouldn't have a crazy goal that you think you're going to achieve in one day. You need to set realistic goals and expectations of yourself. For example, this podcast. It is maybe unrealistic of me to think that in 1 year I'm going to have the most successful show in the world. Is it impossible? No. There's still a chance, but I'm not going to hold and put that pressure on myself if it's going to negatively affect how I show up every single week for you guys. I'm not going to put that pressure on myself because ultimately I need to just look at what I'm doing week by week. And like, I can only focus on this week's episode is going to be awesome. I'm going to work on the content. And when I give advice, I'm going to give advice from the heart. That's all that I can leave with. I can't leave with, oh my God, if this podcast doesn't blow up next week, I'm done. Because if we put too much pressure on ourselves, it can lead to one, lack of consistency, which if you start getting into lack of consistency, like nothing's ever going to come to fruition. And I think I see a lot of people battle with that, where it's like you put this insane pressure on yourself, whether it's at work, whether it's in your relationship, whether it's, you know, in your projects that you're working on. And then it gets to the point where you just kind of feel so overwhelmed that you don't want to do anything. So I think being super mindful on those expectations we're placing on ourselves every single day, every single week, you will be able to minimize a lot of the stress that you're creating for yourself. And the most important thing that I always say is that you need to be very self-aware. Everything that you do, you should be checking in with yourselves. And when you notice these trends or triggers or things that you're doing causing me stress, you need to nip it in the bud. So I urge you that when you see stress start to arise in your life, start to check in with yourself. Maybe that's journaling, maybe that's meditating, maybe that's just sitting with your own thoughts outside, drinking your cup of coffee in the morning. Check in with yourself and ask yourself, like, okay, what's been going on in my life recently that's causing us all this stress? Like, you know, wait a second. Why am I so stressed out at work? And then you sit down and you think and you're like, oh my God, like I'm literally creating this stress myself. Like, why am I putting on this pressure? Like, it's not just on me to rescue this company, right? Or like take this company to the next level. It's not just all on me. I can do I can do my best every single day, but all the work and all that pressure doesn't just rest on my shoulders, and I can't put that on myself. And I urge you, if anyone's going through that situation, maybe with a friend, maybe your friend's going through a hard time or a family member, you have to realize ultimately you can't put all the stress or pressure or problems to solve of other people on yourself because you're only human. You can only do the things that you can do every single day, and you have to be mindful. So if you're going through a stressful situation, make sure you're checking in with yourself and trying to figure out what your triggers are, what you're doing, and your role in your own stress. A few last minute tips that have helped me manage my stress is also making sure that I check in on those negative thoughts that I have. Those negative thoughts of I'm not good enough, the negative thoughts of it's all up to me and you're not meeting expectations. Challenge those thoughts. The minute you get those negative thoughts, tell yourself and remind yourself, like, that's not true. And you're putting that on yourself. I do that all the time. I'm all the time, every single time, because I'm being aware. Whenever I hear a negative thought, I quickly check myself and I remind myself that those thoughts are not in fact true and they're not actually happening. And it's really, really helped me change my mindset, and it's really helped minimize stress overall in my life. Also, even if you're having these negative thoughts, and mind you, I've been in this retrospective self-awareness journey for many years, the negative thoughts are still going to come. I've literally, and I hope some of you can relate to this. Sometimes I'm like driving by myself and I'll have like a dark thought and I'm like, whoa, that was dark. But I tell myself right away, I'm like, that's not true. And I move on. I don't dwell in the negative thoughts. I check them. I tell them that's not true. I check the thought and then I move on. Just because you've had a little dark moment, a dark thought, we do not need to dwell on them. We need to dismiss it and then carry on. All right, guys, that is this week's episode. Hopefully you found it helpful. If you enjoyed this episode and you're enjoying the content that we're putting out, please like and share our content on social media. It really helps us grow. And if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you listen to this podcast, please share it with your family, share it with your friends, share it with your network. That is truly the only way that this podcast will grow. And I want this to be a badass network of women who support and are rooting for each other. Also, stay tuned for upcoming episodes. We have such good content coming your way and bringing you more advice to help you live a more intentional and mindful life. Also, I want to hear from you. So make sure to respond to the Q&A questions we have after the episode. That way we know what's the kind of content that you want to listen and that's important to you, so I can make content more related to what's important to you. And if you do anything, do it with love, passion, and conviction. See you guys next week. Bye.